Let's talk about PlayStation 5 Pro, all the positives, all the negatives, the ongoing conversation around it. There's not that much data on it. You do have Sony CFO Hiroki Totoki addressing the sales, just saying that it's a high-end product targeted at core customers, and they haven't been necessarily eyeing a large sales plan to begin with, so they're very happy with the way that it's going. He says that Totoki says he's under the impression that the product is performing slightly stronger than the pre-orders of the PlayStation 4 Pro during the same period. He says he doesn't think it is adversely affecting the product sales plan. So the general idea is this was always something made as a luxury purchase. It was always made for a small sect of people. There's a little bit more that I'm going to get to in terms of some of the comparisons, some of the console features. But general thoughts on it. I feel like me and you have both gone like, okay, fine, I'll get the damn thing. But then whenever you sort of look at it, it's like, well, it doesn't come with a disc drive. That thing's way too pricey. And then whenever I've dove into the side-by-sides, it really is too similar. And so for me, it's like, I easily talk myself out of it when it would take a more substantial effort to get me to go for it. And I feel like, I do this for a living. It's like playing video games is my main hobby. So it's like, I want the best version of that. But oh my God, is this thing impossible to justify?
Yeah, I think that's right. It's even more so than the PS4 Pro. It is that enthusiast machine. I still think that there is a place for those machines, but this is outside of its core components taking the piss. And I think we've always said that. Like the console itself, I would like to own it, Scott. But like you said, the fact that they sell the disc drive extra for a Pro console that you would expect to have all the bells and whistles, the fact that they're even charging you for the vertical stand, it just does feel like we talked in the WB section about like them disregarding the customers and kind of just trying to get as much out of them as possible. Because this is targeted to enthusiasts who are, if they're going to pay 700 quid for a new console, they're probably all right paying an extra 100 for a disc drive and then an extra 30 for a vertical stand. If you've got that much disposable income at a certain point, what's a little bit more? You know what I mean? I think that's terrible messaging. I think that's a terrible way to treat the consumer base. And I don't think that is mutually exclusive with everything I've seen about the actual output of the Pro being pretty good for enthusiasts. I don't know.
That's kind of the thing, is that like there are examples of it running stuff extremely well. It's just that it's not a straightforward answer. And the way that they announced it, where they said like, look, everyone's splitting their game time. I was thinking about splitting their game time between quality modes, performance modes. This thing's the solution. Don't worry about it. Pro modes going forward, we've got you sorted. And then now that it's here and people are going hands-on with it, there are still quality modes, performance modes. It's just called Quality Pro, Performance Pro. You still can't have everything. And some of that is just a reality of where the industry is at. But for me, and maybe it's just a naive view on it, I am up for paying a certain premium to make that problem go away.
Yeah.
I've said that a few times before, but I thought that's what they were selling. Like, it feels like now that people are getting hands-on, it's like, well, actually, per game, there isn't a pro mode. Even per game, they have different names.
Of course, yeah.
Which is just so annoying.
This is the thing, right? I think I understand where you're coming from, because yes, the part of the messaging, especially in that reveal trailer, was, look, everyone's trying to decide whether to choose this or choose that, and the Pro mode will merge them all. I just think where gaming's at, you're never getting away from those options now. And even when you said there, you do this for a living, you just want the best version of a thing. You're never going to get that unless you get a PC, right? I know, it's a shame, but you just never, that's never going to happen unless...
My soul just descended into hell.
Unless you exit the console space. Consoles are always a little bit of a compromise, even $700 consoles. And like you said there, it's going to completely depend game by game what the developers want to do, If you get an increase in the ceiling in terms of the technology, that's not going to stop developers pushing both frame rate and the visuals if they can, right?
No.
Like that idea of a perfect vision of a game. I know we kind of disagree on this. I don't think that's ever fully existed. I think you've always had these different variations, and you're always going to have developers that say, well, why don't we just do a few modes? Why don't we just push the frame rate to absolute max? Let's take it with the Pro's technology from 60 frames to 100 frames or 120 frames and try to get as best a graphical experience. But at the same time, we can add in a mode that is 30 frames per second and has the best ray tracing you've ever seen and whatnot. And then we could probably have a third mode that's like a compromise of them both and runs at 40.
It becomes... Oh my god, what was the game that had 5 graphics modes on it?
What was it? Oh, Saints Row, wasn't it? Saints Row had crazy ones.
Saints had a bunch, and I'm blanking on the name that was from Tango Gameworks that was set in Japan, and it had 5 different...
Ghostwire Tokyo.
Ghostwire Tokyo had 5 different rendering modes, and I'm like, this is the end of the world, to be honest, or the end of my world anyway. That whole approach of, like I said, to me, it just goes against the marketing. It goes against what this thing was supposed to provide, which is just annoying. Also, I'll throw in a different wrinkle here as to the general conversation around the Pro, which is Sony saying, and they said this a few weeks ago, that the PlayStation 5 Pro's development started before the PlayStation 5 was out. So there is an ongoing conversation of like, oh, if this had released back in 2020, then would that have been this massive next-gen step up? Like this would have been what the specs could have been. And that's more of a conspiratorial line of thinking, but it is a line of thinking bolstered by Final Fantasy VII. Like that's the only game that looks like absolute hell when you play it in the performance mode. It's blurry as hell, but it works very well on the Pro. It's like, is that a set of specs they were aiming for when they were putting Rebirth together? And like, it's just a weird, Remake came out in 2020.
Yeah.
But it's just a weird thing. It's a weird way to sort of go, okay, we're going to do this next step system anyway and solve a problem that we know we have because we're releasing this like system that can't do everything, and we'll just sell you another modular version of this going forward, which is the PC model.
Yes.
So it's like that's ultimately where we're getting to anyway. But it's just the rollout of it is like there's a bit of a cynicism, you'll pay for it anyway type thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I struggle with that because there are always going to be technical limitations with every console, and I think if you're waiting for a console that does everything and you'll never want to move on.
They used to, damn it.
They didn't.
They used to. The 360 did everything. The PS2, the PS1. SNES.
Did it?
The Mega Drive.
Even the
it did everything.
This is funny. Even the PS1, right, going back to Tekken 3, a graphical masterpiece, was different from the arcade version. You know what I mean?
Not in America.
Well, no, but like the backgrounds are different. The backgrounds are fully rendered in the arcade version, and they're far more low res and minimized. No, like the actual, like what's in it. If you're wanting the best version of that game, you're not playing it on PS1, you're playing it in arcades. You know what I mean? There have always been these variations, and I think like they have become more pronounced as we become more like PC gamers. I concede that consoles, one of their biggest selling points was just turn it on and don't worry about it.
Yeah, totally.
But
it's maybe the answer to this problem. That's what consoles are.
I don't think that's true. I think the answer it was never the answer to the problem. It was the answer to not thinking about the problem. It was the answer to not having to consider the problem because you didn't have the option, right? But if you look at all of those games, if you look at all of those consoles, you could back then. I don't think you did as much as we do now. Talk about the differences that we're talking about these days. It's just become more of a feature. Now,
then though, like that, you're right about like certain things back in the 90s being better on the arcades. It was always a thing growing up to go to an arcade and see a more fancy version of a certain thing. That definitely went away across the 2000s and the early 2010s. Like we were getting specific, Metal Gear Solid 2 or whatever it is. You're getting specific games made for a certain set of specs that don't have you choosing between frame rates and resolutions. Everything was just optimized.
For the most part, though.
Yeah. Well, you think for the most part the other way?
Single platform games, 100%. They are optimized for that machine. Metal Gear Solid 2, when it first came out, optimized for the PlayStation 2, no other consoles. I don't think that was the case with multi-platform games. You look at something like Crysis 2 that released on Xbox, and you look at the PC version, and it's kind of like night or day. It's got all of these differences and stuff. You look at the differences between 360 games and PS3 games and the way that they run. Skyrim on PS3 being like an absolute trash fire. Of course, we've always had games that, are optimized for a single vision, for a single machine. But I think the moment you go multi-platform, you look at something like Resi 4, which has so many different versions with so many different technical ceilings and flaws that I think it's always been there and always been in the background. And I know we've had this conversation so many times and our listeners and our audience is probably so sick of it, but I think for every example you can make, I think for something that was well optimized, I could probably counter that with something that was multi-platform and had all the differences that we talk about today.
You're definitely right that it was always an ongoing. There was always a background conversation on a different or a slightly better version of a game. I think the one key thing that has changed is that the person making the decision behind how that game looks got switched over to the consumer. Where in those previous generations, it was like, even if it was a big difference between Skyrim on 360 or PS3, Bethesda were trying to get there with both versions. They weren't going like, we don't know, you guys pick. We can't make both of this work. You're picking between one of the two. And then from the last generation onwards, we've had that quality mode, performance mode thing, and the idea of them putting a stamp on one final version hasn't been a thing. Now, that is then viewed positively or negatively. Negatively to me, positively to you, or a lot of people who like picking between the two.
Yeah.
But that's just kind of where we're at. I don't know. I hoped it was going away, like to a degree. That's how I thought they were selling this thing. And I think that's a shame. Like even to throw another wrinkle in is they have this PS4 upgrade toggle that you can switch on, which for the most part works. But Digital Foundry found that depending on a game's lighting model, it then makes it just not work. So certain titles it doesn't do anything. Certain games it'll make the text look a lot smoother, whatever it is. But that idea of paying this exorbitant amount of money to just fix the issues of the last couple of generations, let's say, from my point of view. That still isn't the case, and that's a shame. I think, at least for myself.
Yeah, I think we're in different stages of grief to a certain extent, Scott. I think I'm more in the acceptance stage that consoles are just PCs now. They're just like versions of PCs, and that's kind of never gone away. I think we were very, as console fans ourselves, I think we spent a lot of our lives insulated from this wider stuff. Like we mentioned Skyrim there, like. Who are we to say that was Bethesda's stamp of approval when that game also came out on PC with adjustable options and different frame rates and whatnot? I don't know. I don't know. I wouldn't say that ours is the vision. Like the 360 version is the vision, and everything else is trying to get to that, because then I think it does potentially invalidate the PC, which is just blown that up to epic proportions over the years, and allows you to run it in like 120 frames per second or whatever it is.
I guess that's the thing, is that it would be Bethesda. It's the best they can do on the specs that are available.
Yeah.
Whereas like now it's the best we can do with a toggle. It's the best. It's like getting all the way down this straight road that we've had for decades, and then being like, actually there's two forks at the end, and you pick one of the two.
Yeah.
And it's like, and then no matter how much money you throw at that, you're still picking one of the two, and that is just fundamentally annoying to someone like me who just wants to play the best version of the damn game.
I think, I've said it before, but I think gamers
I think you're right.
are partly so great because they're so diverse. I'm part of the 30% of the minority who chooses quality mode over performance mode. Yep. And because of that, I think it would be a shame to get rid of the choice and just look at the data and say, well, most people prefer performance. Let's just only choose performance. I'm like, why not both? Why not both? Because I was thinking, I'm not saying you're saying this, but who am I to say a game should focus on a specific kind of approach to the technical specs behind it? Like, who am I to say that we should prioritize graphics or we should prioritize frame rate in an era where we can have both? Like, we are we have that ability to use the toggle. So both I am satisfied and you are satisfied, because we can both play Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and I'll play it on quality mode and you'll play it on performance.
But I have horrible graphics and you have a worse frame rate.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the compromise I'm willing to take, because that's my point, is that we shouldn't have to compromise, and we didn't in past generations. And systems like this were meant to solve that problem. Well, you're just not seeing the compromise. You know what I mean? In something like Gears of War 3 or something, playing at 30 frames per second, that's just a quality mode without the name, right? Like,
Like previous generations, they did very well by not exposing this to the consumer. Yeah. Like that's part of how you fix it, is you take it away again. Like people won't worry about something they don't know exists.
But they will now, right?
Well, that's
because I think even before we got to this generation, like how many times were we watching like videos back in the day about the differences between the PS4 and the PS4 Pro, or the Xbox and the Xbox Series X, like and the differences in frame rate, the differences in resolution, not to mention PC on top of that. We know this stuff is possible on other machines. So can we ever go back to that ignorance we used to have? I think we're too exposed to all of these different variations of games now that it would feel like we're missing something if we were limited in that way. I don't know. I think so.
Possibly. I think the data, I forgot what that exact split was, but it was a 70-30 split between performance and quality. If that was more in the middle, then it would indicate that the average person is picking one or the other, whereas like it seems like the majority are going with the performance mode. And so you can point to like, well, there's an optimum version of this game that could have existed. I think a lot of those conversations on variables happen after launch, after gameplay, after we get hands-on. But it's not like we were playing games in previous gens going like, oh, this ray tracing should have been here, or this should have done whatever. It's like you're dealing with the version that's put in front of you.
I think we were. I could just remember, I use Gears of War as an example because I remember the few raw at the time, because it's the same conversation we had with Starfield, where I remember Epic saying, we are locking it at 30 frames per second because it's more cinematic, because we want to push the visuals. And so I remember people questioning it back then, being like, well, why not 60? Why not change focus? So again, I think it's a case of these conversations have always been around, just being less aware of it. Because I think maybe the majority of people didn't question it back then, but yeah, I just don't think we could ever put it back in its box. And as soon as people start to question it, as soon as people start to say, well, you know, on PC, you can play this at 60, you can play this at 120,
right,
and that kind of conversation gets out, then it becomes, I think it becomes frustrating as console players to then have to go back and then, I don't know, I guess I was repeating myself.
No, that's fair. I think, yeah, we'll wrap it, but I think for me, I'm like, go play on PC then. If you want all the sliders and everything else, like that's just not what consoles are meant to be a solution to this thing.
If PCs were the same price, but I think that's a bit unfair on the people. Like, I couldn't afford a proper PC that does all the bells and whistles, right?
No, but if you were devoting your life to this, to trying to get like everything working, then you would invest in PC.
But not everyone can. Not everyone can, right? Like PCs, to get like the highest end version of something, even if I'm dedicating my life to something, doesn't mean I have £1,000 minimum to spend on a PC.
I mean, I have no idea about PC pricing. I just, like I said, if that was the end game of the why you're playing games is to get everything maxed out, then like it's, to me, it gets around what consoles were created to provide,
right?
Which is like a more sort of like down the line, you know, version of the specs. You are right that the problem was totally there before, and it does make me think about previous generations in a slightly different way. But yeah, ultimately, to bring it back to the PS5 Pro, I feel like the way that they advertised it was, don't worry, we got you. And then in reality, they don't got you. in certain titles, you know, as much as we love Dragon Age, the new Dragon Age is one that's being singled out as just like the pro mode actually breaks the game. People are waiting for like a patch to fix it again. Which is a whole other thing in terms of trying to get as many titles developers on board as possible to bolster the sales plan, and then not being able necessarily to deliver on all those patches on those graphics modes or whatever, and then still leaving it back up to choice on the consumer side, which I don't know what the average person thinks, if they're glad the options are there, if they just default to performance and go like, I'm good, like I'm fine. I'm curious about all that stuff.
Yeah,
but
I always, I think you're making definitely some good points. I just, you know, when you say that, even if it is a 70-30 split, like 30% can still be millions of players. If you look at something like, I don't know, Marvel Spider-Man with 20 million players, if that had like the options at launch, that's what is 30% of that? I want to say, Scott, that's about 6 million players. You know what I mean? So it's not like, even though 6 million players versus 14 million players, yeah, there's a huge difference, but would you want to tell those 6 million players your way of playing, and we're going to ignore that and we're going to focus on this? Like, what? I don't know why you would do that when you have the option for both.
Which I guess is why we are where we are.
Yeah.
Like some of the PS5 Pro modes are really cool. Final Fantasy is a massive one because it fixes a really obvious issue with the launch version of that game from earlier in the year. But then others, things like Insomniac, you know, No Man's Sky, Hello Games have the first 8K PS5 video game just because of how much the Pro can do. But that is an option you're choosing to enable, and that's cool to a degree. I'm always going to want like a more unified thing. But I think that ultimately all of this is the heart of why the PS5 Pro has been received so all over the place. Because you have the enthusiasts, but you have the skeptics, and you have the people who are anti the system. I think I'm still skeptical, and I'm up for upgrading, but they cannot give me a straight way to upgrade other than just throwing over £1,000 at the problem.